Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This is Making Imagination. Today I got to talk with writer Todd Garfield on the topic of writing for animation. This is going to be a little bit different from story and animation, however very closely related. Writing TV animation, Todd, first of all, has always been too generous with his time when it comes to me. He was generous again to share some of his insights and stories and that sort of thing, and just talk craft, talk shop with me. So I hope you'll pick up a thing or two if you're interested in writing for animation. Hopefully this will be a helpful conversation, if not inspiring as well. One thing to note before we dive in, writing for TV animation is a little bit different than writing for feature animation. However, those two are similar as well. But we'll get into that. Here's my conversation with Todd.
I didn't have the guts to go to an art school, and I went to a liberal arts college, but they had an animation program there, and I did an animated film every year there, and did a big senior project, an 8-minute cell animated film, which was probably one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. I did that all by myself. I went pretty much insane, like thousands of drawings and cell paintings and all that. But my the previous year, this woman, Linda Saminsky, came to speak at my school, worked at Cartoon Network, but we hit it off pretty well. And she was a mentor on my senior project. And we stayed in touch, and Cartoon Network Studios was opening right the same year I was graduating. So through, keeping my contacts with her and stuff, I lucked myself into my first animation job, which was a PA on Samurai Jack. It was like Gendy Tartakovsky, right? Like that whole team, they were old Ren and Stimpy people, and they've all gone on to, people working at Pixar and directing features. It was like the best of the best. And I learned a ton working there, but I think, I thought I was going to be a storyboard artist, or at my school, I thought I was just going to do everything. They didn't teach you like, oh, there's a person who does this specific task, and that, like, a designer and the board artist and the background artist. Like, that wasn't a thing. It was just, you did everything. And as I got into it, I thought I was going to maybe do some boarding. But eventually, there was another artist there who had a show in development at Warner Brothers, who we were talking about it a lot at lunch, and he wasn't liking any of the writers that they had, that they were, he wasn't connecting with the material that they were pushing on his pilot. And I had a bunch of ideas for it. So I just went home one night and just kind of like pounded out an idea for a script I had. Like, I wrote almost an entire script that night. And he loved it, and his agent loved it, and Warner Brothers really liked it. So that was like my first official writing job. They brought me on to kind of write that pilot and work on that. And from there, it was, I decided to draw with my words instead of doing the storyboard thing. But I learned so much about boarding, and I think that's what makes me in it, like, has made me good at writing for animation, is I kind of think in storyboards, I think. And so I'm never, when writers will say sometimes, like, let's let the board artist figure it out. I'm kind of like, no, let's give the board artist, something to work with, like something choreographed. And like, if they can plus it or do something better, awesome. But there's always something for them to fall back on. But I think I learned so much board language just subconsciously because I started before, people were doing it digitally. So when I'd get boards from Gendy or anyone else on the Samurai Jack team, there'd be, like, thumbnails this big, or they draw an 11 by 17, and I'd be at the copy machine, sizing all these panels and just absorbing this shot language.
Wow.
So it was like just an education, and especially like action. It was just kind of an education in boarding and staging, and everything was so cinematic. And from there, I I started writing freelance while I stayed in production. I actually went on to my producer on Samurai Jack went to work on American Dad. So I went to work on American Dad for a season as the production manager, and also then sitting in there with meetings with those guys and Seth MacFarlane. And so I learned, action from Gendy Tartakovsky and, Seth MacFarlane humor. So I was very lucky early on. And then I actually, so while I was on there, I finally got a job offer on a show at Disney, and gave my notice. And the Monday I was supposed to start on that show at Disney, it got canceled. so I think that's what, but I remember just backtracking a little bit while I was doing the freelance thing. I remember meeting with someone and they saw my resume, and I had like a couple freelance scripts on. They're like, "How do you pay the bills?" I'm like, "Well, I'm a production manager. I'm trying to become a writer." And they said, "Oh, you're a production manager. You're not a writer." And I was like, "Oh, that's how it is." But like once I became unemployed and at Disney and was on that show at Disney, I guess that officially made me an official writer because I was not in production anymore. So I don't know. From there, I rode the freelance train a lot. I got a show in development at Disney. I mean, my first kind of more supervisor writing role was story editing on the Voltron Force. And, from there, I did some stuff at Disney Toon, and I worked on Turbo for DreamWorks, which was the first Netflix show. So that was a huge learning curve. And that's where I kind of jumped from like being a story editor to being more of a producer. And produced a couple more things for DreamWorks, and then went to Nickelodeon, and then there was a pandemic, and here we are. Was that a long enough answer for your first question?
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. That makes me think of a lot of things. One kind of follow-up question, though. Since you did kind of learn writing kind of through the boarding process, and you were on a board-driven show, Samurai Jack, do you ever, like in your own processes, do you ever kind of thumbnail stuff out before you write it?
For sure. Oh, not before I write it. The way I know just enough, I can draw well enough to like probably be dangerous, I guess, or I don't know. But it's like I can draw well enough to communicate a thought, but my drawings don't belong on television. So it's definitely helped more with especially when I got into a producer role and I'm like reviewing animatics and that kind of stuff. I can be like, no, I'm kind of like, if they're like, this is too complicated of a scene, I can thumbnail out some junk, being like, like I'm picturing it more like this is how we could do it with very simply. Or, like if there's a design, like there was a show I was working on recently and I had this just like really stupid, like parade float thing in mind, and the designers weren't quite getting what I was going for. So I drew my bad version. They're like, oh, okay. So then they could do their professional looking version of it.
Interesting. Do you ever get called in on like a board driven show to like punch things up ever?
I haven't done a board driven show in quite a while, but I totally appreciate board driven shows. It's an amazing thing because I mean to be an artist and a writer at the same time is unbelievable, and I couldn't appreciate that talent more. But I think I can look at a board. I think one of the things that I can be helpful with is I can like look at a board or look at an animatic and figure out how to tighten it and make it sharp. But in general, I kind of push for more script driven stuff just because I feel like I'm more useful in that capacity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. That's fascinating. You mentioned Voltron, so I'm going to circle back to that a little bit. I first met you on Voltron Force, and you've worked on. Yeah, that's right. In the costume. Oh yes, yeah. I forgot about that. But you've also worked on Thundercats too. But these are like established properties, and probably one of your some of your earlier ones. How do you approach an established property that has lasted for decades, that has a fan base, while and still trying to bring some new flavor to it? Because that seems tricky.
It's interesting, like, because that's kind of, I mean, I would say it's my niche that I've like unintentionally gotten, but like, it feels like that's the general trend in the industry right now. Like, IP is, I mean, to get your own original show done now is a lot harder than it used to be. It's all IP.
Huh.
But I mean, that's kind of where I've kind of found my niche is like, the past several shows I've run have all been movies that I've adapted into television shows. And I think, I mean, God, I have a lot of opinions on this, but I think like with Voltron was a perfect example where, it's a different approach to each one. That one, I think I got the job, because, our mutual buddy, Jeremy, was the big Voltron nerd on that one. And I loved Voltron growing up. Like I had a couple of the toys, but I was not like steeped in Voltron lore. I did my research when I got the job. It was a good marriage because Jeremy was kind of like the Voltron historian, and I was kind of the person who could make it accessible to anybody because it had to be accessible to me. So it was not like Jeremy would always like keep me in line with that. Like I was trying to push it to do all sorts of weird stuff that they've never done in Voltron, but still respect the property. And you got to like find that line of what's going to be too far. And did we cross it at times? Probably, but it was fun. But I think with adapting movies, like Thundercats, I had very little to do with the development of that tone and that universe had been established already, and like to write for those voices that everyone knew, or in that version of those voices, it was awesome to have that opportunity. But that I did not, have much to do with how that universe worked. I just got to play in that sandbox. But the other stuff I've done, the movies I've adapted, the thing I've noticed most is movies, the way the characters work in movies, they kind of only need one goal. They're a character invented to tell a story, whereas when you need that character to last for, well, back in the day, hopefully hundreds of episodes, now 8, but you gotta kind of round out a lot of characters. There were, especially the secondary ones, or find, sometimes the hero in a movie isn't as colorful as you want them to be, so you kind of give them a little more more flaws or make them goofier or yeah. So I think that's, I think that's the biggest thing, like figuring out what to do to make a character last for more than one story, to really figure them out, to make them stretch for a TV show.
Yeah, that's interesting. Does that change much with the duration of the show? So let's say, Voltron Force was 26 episodes with the potential for further future seasons, but shows are getting shorter and shorter. Like you said, 8 episodes or whatever. Does that change the way you approach the character, knowing this person has to go on for X number of episodes versus Y?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if it changes the character as much, but it definitely changes like what you can do with them.
Yeah.
I have not worked on an 8 episode thing yet. I've not had that challenge yet. But even in Voltron, I was figuring out episode arc. I think in general now with the streaming and the serialization of things, you can actually tell 10 stories that are supposed to be in order. Whereas back in the day, you never knew what order any network was going to air things in. So if you wanted to tell a serialized story, you kind of everything had to stand alone. Even still, with streaming, you want every episode to stand on its own. But there'd be like tentpole episodes. There'd be like, things that didn't have to do with the big story. And then every, 4 or 5 episodes, you touch on the bigger arc. Whereas now you have the opportunity to tell like one huge epic story, which, is a different sort of challenge or monster, but can be really cool.
Huh. At what part, what point of production, pre-production, are you generally brought in to a show, or does it change per show?
I mean, it's interesting. So at DreamWorks, I started as a staff writer on Turbo, and then became story editor, and eventually a co-EP on that as things were shifting. And because I think the direction of the show initially was just different than what they had pictured. So I gave a pitch on it, and I think eventually they went with that pitch. And so they brought me, promoted me to kind of do that. And then they moved me on to another property that was already in development, Home. And I think they just wanted me to kind of course correct the writing a little bit. And I think I was supposed to be there temporarily, but there was some shifts on that show. So I ended up staying and producing that all the way. Turbo, I was there through the end of post while I was kind of rolling onto Home. Home, I was on almost through post, but the main creator of that show stayed on through the end. And then I went over to Nickelodeon, where I worked on another film that was being turned into a TV show. And that I was brought on very early on, and, kind of developed what the TV show would be, and stayed on through the final mix. So I was on for the whole time for that one.
Does it take you a while when you're writing for series and shows and pilots? Does it take you a while to kind of find the character's voice, or do you find
It's interesting. There's a couple stages to it. I often don't have trouble finding the character's voice. If I'm having trouble finding it, it's probably not a good character, you know? But oftentimes I think the voice, you find what you think the voice is going to be, and you start writing that, and then you start recording that voice, and the actors bring a thing to it, and it definitely like changes. You start writing to how the character is being played by the actor, and there's kind of like a course correction that starts to happen kind of like after several records where, I've been lucky to work with some amazing voice actors who all bring their own thing to it. And it's kind of, sometimes it's a direction you never pictured. And yeah, you kind of adapt the writing to that.
And what would you say kind of comes most naturally to you? Is it the voice of the character, or is it kind of just plot structure or action?
That's an interesting question. What comes most naturally? I love world building like initially, and like kind of building stuff out. I always find myself, really loving that, D-level character that has just made a few appearances. I'm like, I want to give that guy an episode, like a whole episode. I find myself drawn to just like building out the weirdos in the world. But I don't know. I love writing banter, dialogue, and and plot. There's always this balance between plot and character when you're writing, and that's always like a puzzle. I love it. It's like a puzzle to solve every script you attack. So that's, I don't know. I really like that challenge. Most days I like that challenge. Some days I don't like that challenge. But yeah, I'd say kind of like I love putting in the funny, and like once you got the structure in there, which is obviously very important. I just love going back and punching and tightening, and that's the fun part. Putting in all the nonsense.
Nice. Yeah. Do you have a process for how you attack a script, or just kind of feel it out?
Yeah, well, it's funny. It does. I have like a general process, but it's kind of on, like a story by story basis. But in general, I kind of try to look for a plot story to marry with a character story. That's what actually, I started this process on Voltron actually, and I still use it to this day when I'm kind of like trying to break a season. Jeremy and I called it our murder board, where I started like, I would make a whole list of, potential character stories and potential plot stories. And I think we need to have like some cool locations and whatever, just a bunch of different categories. And then you're just like, oh, we could do this one with this one, and kind of put together a story. But at the heart of it, like, the plot's usually pretty easy to figure out for the most part. It's the making the character story work that's generally the bigger challenge. Like, I don't know. I actually fell into action writing kind of by accident. Like I've always been more of a comedy guy. It's funny when I got offered the job to work on Samurai Jack, it was between that and another like comedy show. And I won't use the exact quote from Linda, but I was like, I don't know, should I do like the Samurai Jack one? Cause I'm more of a comedy guy. And she basically used some words to tell me I had a chance to work with Gendy Tartakovsky, and you don't pass that up. So I went on to Samurai Jack, and but actually I kind of just fell in the action writing, and actually like it came pretty naturally. Like I had fun doing that, and I found that action shows have been they're generally less challenging for me to write than comedies are. And I love writing comedy. I'm definitely more of a comedy person, but I find it's easier for me to write a cool action scene, and I have to think a lot more to be funny, or at least to the point where I think I'm funny. I don't know if other people think I'm funny, but but I definitely have to put more effort in to stage something that's up to my comedy standard.
So when you're supervising writer, how do you maintain like consistency of character and the vision amongst all your writers?
Going back to Voltron again, that was a really interesting. We had a ton of freelancers on there. I had very few freelancers who did repeat scripts, and just because of the pace we were working at, not for any other reason. But I do know, like Brandon Sawyer was wrote the most freelance scripts, and he's the one running the most successful kids show, I think, on Netflix right now, Boss Baby. So he's not available anymore. Scott Sonnenborn was another one, but like, so when guys like that were doing it, they were getting the voice a little more, but people who were writing one-off freelance scripts, it's really hard to get the voice in that. So I think on Voltron, I was very busy rehashing a good portion of the dialogue to keep it on voice. And then like, once I got to, let's just use Turbo as an example, where I had a room of consistent writers, eventually, like what I learned was, there's this writer's version of Turbo and that writer's version of Turbo. They all sound like Turbo, but I can tell you, like, Madison wrote that line for Turbo, and Sam wrote that line for Turbo, and Nick and Devin definitely wrote that line for Turbo. Like, it's interesting to see, like, there's a writer's voice that stays in the character's voice, and when you have a good room, that's like pretty ideal, where you don't have to change it. It's like that definitely sounds like it's the character, but I definitely hear that person's voice within the character.
So you had mentioned you originally were kind of leaning towards like comedy writing. You kind of fell into action writing by accident. Is there kind of a momentum, like you write an action show and people start coming after you for more action shows? And do you have to protect against being pigeonholed, or is that?
Yeah, you do. And it varies from executive to executive, I think. But I mean, there was a big moment that really just opened my eyes, where I was rolling off a set of comedies somewhere, and there was some pretty big action properties, like, features being adapted. And I really, like, one of them was my favorite, and I really wanted to get in on it. And I was talking with the executives there, and they were like, you're not going to be up for this. Like, you're a comedy guy. Huh. And I was just like, look at my resume. I'm just like, yeah, Thundercats, Voltron, Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, I've done a lot of action, but to them, I was a comedy guy. And that's, it depends. I think there's some people who are good about it, and I think there's other people who pigeonhole you, and it just, depends on where you're at. I've been pigeonholed at many points in my career for various things. Huh. And sometimes you just gotta work around that. Huh. Or just lean into it.
Do you find a lot of variation working with different producers, different showrunners?
It's the people you work with make or break your life happiness. I think assembling a good team of people you want to be with, that can make or break how a show turns out, and how you feel on a daily basis. So I try to choose wisely when I can, and sometimes I just work the best I can within a circumstance.
Fair. That makes sense. Do you, when you're writing, actually, I'm going to preface this. One time I was, I wrote a little script for Jeremy back at Coolfire, in the Coolfire days, and it opened with like some characters being bored, and that was like the catalyst for, it wasn't a catalyst, it was a scene for, they were bored, and then something was supposed to happen. And I don't know if you said this and or remember it, but Jeremy came back and he was like, Wes, now listen, Todd told me one time, he's like, you never open with like, they're just bored, like it was a no-no for just starting a scene. I don't know if you said that, but it leads me to my question. Do you have rules that, well, A, did you say that? And B, do you have rules when it comes to writing that like, no, we just don't do, X, Y, Z?
It's so funny. I do have some rules. I'll share that. I'm just trying to think about if I said that to Jeremy. I think there's a way. I mean, I don't know. If I did say that, it was like 10 years ago, and I have a little more experience under my belt. But I'd say if I was starting a scene where everyone was bored, it would have to be very funny boredom. Like I wouldn't, because like if you play, it's hard to play boredom and not have your audience be bored. That I think that's you got to do it in a clever, unique way. I do have some rules that like I try to stick to. I tried never to write time travel stories. That's one of my rules, because those just, oh God, what a mess. What a mess. there's always some logic hammer that's just like, we're going to have to ignore that if we want this to work. I try to avoid time travel stories, and there's probably a couple phrases I try to avoid using that I'm sure I'm not the only one that tries to avoid them. And I often try to, always early on, it became a joke. I keep going back to Turbo, but like I try not to do like, and then they go to space. Like, but once we got into the last season of Turbo and we were just doing weird stuff, like the writer who kept, I want to send them to space. So finally, like, we sent them to space, and I was like, if we're going to space, it's going to be a two-parter. And the space station that they launch from is the Van Nuys batting cages and space station, and it's just going to be super weird, and they're going to ride on easy cheese, and it had to be like a very unique take on going to space. But there's a couple things I just like try to avoid, but I think my biggest rule is, and I'm sure someday I will end up doing it, but time travel. Time travel's a mess.
Fair. That's fair. That makes a lot of sense. Kind of in the same vein of rules, I once watched a panel with like 90s TV writers for like X-Men and those shows, and they were talking about kind of a code, I guess kind of a TV code of like things they couldn't write just because of the time they were in. And they were talking about how they really couldn't use guns. So they ended up just using like blasters, kind of like
just make it a laser. Anything. It's a imitatable axe, and like, I mean, I don't even want to talk about guns right now. Like that's way too sensitive a topic. But the funniest story about weapons and that kind of stuff was on Motor City, which was a show done by Titmouse for Disney. They wanted to have nunchucks, and they said the character couldn't have them, and they pitched, what if he has gunchucks? And they were like, okay. So you could have like laser wheeling gunchucks. That was the fix for nunchucks. So usually there's a way around it. But yeah, like when it comes to the violence stuff, like usually if there's like if kids can imitate it, you generally can't do it, which is why you see so many lasers on TV.
Are there ingredients or principles that make good writing for TV?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have any secret sauce for that. I think like it's all about the character for me. Like if you have basically, if you could put your characters anywhere, like, and just drop them and just, put them in a room with a box and you could write a scene with that, then you have good characters. And if your stories kind of, that's what I think. As long as the characters are driving the stories and their personalities, like, I just like to want to hang out with the gang that I'm writing about. If you can do that, then you're doing your job.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. That's an interesting. I think that's cool. Just kind of, putting your characters in a room and kind of seeing like, can you still have an interesting scene with not much going on? I've always thought that was made for an interesting movie, where the filmmakers would try to create interesting drama within one scenario or one setting. 12 Angry Men or something.
Well, a lot of times, on a production, you have to, rob Peter to pay Paul. If you want to do a big episode, you got to make a compromise on some other ones. So that's why you end up with the bottle episodes. And that's when you figure out how good your characters really are.
So let's say when you're crafting an idea, be that for a new show or a new episode, how do you go about kind of pitching that? Like, how do you pitch that?
That's another one that kind of depends on the audience. Like once you get to know your if I don't know the person I'm going in to pitch cold, I will try not to be over rehearsed, but I want to really know my stuff. Whereas like if I'm already on a show and I have a good relationship with the executive, or, if I'm just talking with one of the writers, you can go in and just kind of be like, hey, I got this vague idea. Let's chat about it and see where we land. But if you're going in for like a big pitch, and that's the other thing too. Like I could be going in for a formal pitch with someone I know very well, and it is a little more informal. But you never know who's going to be there with them. And so I try to like not rehearse is too strong a word for what I do, because you don't want to sound like you're, reciting something you've practiced. You want it to feel like a conversation, but I definitely want to like know the direction of I want to know where I'm starting, and hopefully, follow the conversation, know well enough to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever pitched anything like an episode or gag even that you're just really glad, like you're just proud of, like you're glad it got in there, or you glad it got done, or whatever?
Yeah, there's a couple things where I've even like we pitched them as a joke and they made it in, and it was like, what, executive, are you sure you want that? Like, it's there. It's there. It's in the episode. And I checked several times. So I was like, are you guys sure we can do this? Because like I said it, and then I was like, we can't use that. We'll just use it for the pitch, and then we'll change the name. And they're like, that's fine. Like, all right.
Since you have written so many shows and specials based on movies, feature films, does a film ever come out that you're kind of hoping will get turned into an animated show that you can work on? Or do you just enjoy the movie? And
oh, no, I mean, like, I always think, like, there's so many movies I've wanted to turn into shows that I have not been allowed to do. I've given up on it at this point, but Pixar is, remarkably precious about their stuff. They're starting to break out a little more with Disney Plus, but for years, anytime there was a new executive at Disney, I would be like, I got an idea for Finding Nemo. I had like a fully fleshed out pitch for Finding Nemo, like an awesome show for it, and no one cares. Because that's right up my alley. Like, I love scuba diving. We have so many saltwater fish tanks, and like, that's like my favorite thing in life. And when Finding Nemo came out, I just wanted to do a show based on that so badly, and I came up with a take I love, and it's just never going to happen. Like, no one, but yeah, stuff like that has happened. That's the strongest example I could think of. The other was I've been pitching for years that like basically wanted to do TV shows based on rides at Disney, and they're finally doing that.
You've kind of touched on this a little bit already, I guess, but so is it different kind of writing a TV special versus a TV series? I mean,
I've written a couple TV specials. The biggest special I wrote was and I shouldn't say I wrote it. I was one of the like co-EPs on Home when they did a big holiday music special. And the biggest difference with that, obviously they're longer, so you have bigger stories. So you often have more board artists involved, so there's more collaboration. But the biggest difference for that with me is I got to write a bunch of songs for it too, which was really fun. That was what I had the most fun. It's funny, on Home, the songwriting's a whole other tangent thing, but I've written like a couple, like, even that random thing that started my writing career. I just kind of like one day just kind of knocked out some lyrics for a theme song for it just because it came into my head, and they ended up using it for the theme song. And that's kind of the first official song I wrote. And over the years, I enjoy writing lyrics. And for Turbo, we wrote a couple songs, and one actually got nominated for an Emmy.
Whoa!
So that gave me it was this like Monty Python stupid song about like all the ways you can die in space, the space episode, and it got nominated. And so when I went on to Home, I had this like kind of undeserved songwriting cred. So like I worked with the composer a lot on lyrics on that, and I got to write lyrics for like Cher, and then Kelly Clarkson sang on our Christmas special. I got to write a song for that, and so that was kind of cool. So I think that was I wrote a song about latkes for the Hanukkah section on the holiday special, and it was a rap. And if you look at that formula, like kids cartoon rap Hanukkah, like that should not be good. but it turned out really fun. Like, it's one of the most fun things I've ever worked on. I think that was the biggest difference for me. I haven't written like a ton of specials. That's the biggest special I kind of wrote on. That's the first time I got like a full executive producer credit on something too. But I think the biggest difference on that was, it's just a longer episode, but I got to do more songs because of it with bigger names. So it was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Are those songs written in collaboration with like a composer, or are you?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'll send the composer the lyrics, and the guy I wrote the most songs with is this guy, Alex Skaringas, who does a ton of stuff. And he's so great at just like turning stuff into catchy earworms. And so I would send him the lyrics, and then he would send something back, and it's just like, if you hear it, you're done. Like, it's in your head forever. It's just, they're just so catchy. So it was really fun. Like, he would send something back, and then we'd go, I would often be there while we record it. And it was that was one of my favorite processes on that show. I love doing that.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Do those things kind of surprise you just as you get the opportunity and you're like, man, I really love this? Because,
the song thing kind of came out of nowhere, and it made me like, I'm going to start to say something, and I'll preface with, I still suck at guitar. But I kind of got a guitar in college and just kind of like tinkered around with tabs online and stuff. But once I started, writing songs, I started kind of, especially during the pandemic, like getting more, I was like taking it an opportunity to get back into that, and have been learning that a little more over the past few years. And I got my kid an electric guitar, so he had something to do over the pandemic. So we kind of get to do that together now, which is kind of fun.
Awesome. It has collaboration in writing, collaboration on shows. Has that changed dramatically since the pandemic, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is how we collaborate now. Like, it's starting to change a little bit, but I'm not currently staffed on something where I'd be going into a studio, but in general, like I have discovered how much of a collaborator I am. I don't work as well in like isolation, which is pretty much what this is. Like I could still call someone and chat with them about what I'm writing or what they're writing, but I'm the kind of writer who, like, when I'm on a show with the staff, like, I'll run into my writer's room and be like, I need 5 quick, let's take 5 minutes and pitch gags on this thing, and then go back in, or I love, or popping in to talk with the designers if we need to figure out something. I'm definitely, or talking with the board artists, talking with my directors. I love kind of just popping in, and especially with the writers, it's hard to just have to schedule seeing someone on your screen.
Yeah. Now they're often, well, maybe this varies too much, but kind of on a given show, how many writers would you say generally?
On most of the shows that I've had, you generally have like the showrunner or story editor. So on my last show, I had I was, as the EP on that show, I got to bring in a story editor. Sometimes it's weird as a writer EP to have a story editor, because like you're story editing the story editor. But it was actually someone from Voltron. Scott Sonnenborn was on my last show, and he was a story editor. And then I had 2 writers and a script coordinator, and I always try to hire a script coordinator. I always read their samples before I hire them, because I always hire that person with the intention of, hopefully making them a writer one day. So in fact, I don't think I've ever had a script coordinator who hasn't at least done a freelance script or 2. So so generally that's what you have, and I like letting the script coordinator have a voice in the room. So generally you have like yourself, 3 writers, or, a writing team amongst those, and a script coordinator. So that's generally my writer's room when I get, that's what like most animated show budgets allow. But I don't know, like, the landscape is changing so much. I don't know what that's going to be on the next show I get to staff up.
Yeah. Since the landscape is changing, it seems like that is the nature of the beast. What would you say to someone who wanted to get into writing for TV animation?
Become an Imagineer. Follow your other dream. Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, the most important thing is just, God, I don't even know what I would tell someone coming into it these days. I don't know. I'm so far removed
Yeah.
from that part of the business at this point. Especially, like, I mean, I guess if you would have asked me pre-pandemic, I'm trying to even think what I would have answered then. But I think the most important thing is to just have a strong sample. That's, I mean, above all, like, and you need a sample that really shows you have not only an understanding of writing and structure, but also shows your voice and your sense of humor or whatever you want people to know about you. Like that's because a long time ago, people wanted specs of existing shows, and that kind of went away. Now people want like original work. And whenever I would get a stack of writers to read, I guess that would be the best way for me to like kind of say what advice I'd give, like when I read scripts, what I look for from, like, I'm just reading someone I don't know. Obviously something that grabs you quick, but yeah, something that shows that you understand structure and storytelling, and gives a sense of your voice, because that's the main thing too. Like if someone writes a script and they're really funny, but the structure's a mess, it's like I and people I know can make funny. That's the easy part.
Yeah.
Like if I'm, I'll be reading a script, picturing everything I'll have to do to make the script work. And that's where I'm just like, oh, I don't think so. I think that's it. Because like, yeah, if you understand structure and story, that when I'm reading a script, that's what I want to see. Like, can you make me care about the character? Do you know how a scene works? Do you know how to get out of a scene? Do you know pacing? That kind of stuff. Because that's mainly structure. If I have to tear it apart to the studs, then I will pass that script and look at the next one.
Yeah. Just a couple questions here as we wrap. Have you given much thought to or had any desire for feature film?
Oh, I have much desire for that, but that's one of those things. I think it's the pigeonholing thing.
Sure.
Where I've been up, even in the past year or two, I've been up or very close for some pretty big feature projects, and every time they've gone with the name. Like it's been down to, at least from what I'm told, it's been down to me and one, maybe two other people, and it's always the name that gets it.
Dang.
So, so it's tough. I'm definitely known as a TV writer, and writing a feature spec script at this point, I don't even know. Like, that's always a weird thing to do, because especially in animation, it's a little different, but it seems like feature is so director driven, especially at kind of the bigger studios, and it's they're directors who have been putting in their time. They've earned their shot at a feature.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard line to cross. If I had the opportunity to do it, yeah, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Just for the experience of it. But what is a feature now anymore? Anyway, is it just a long Netflix drop, or is it something that goes into theaters? Like, all the lines are being blurred these days now, so who knows?
Yeah, that's true. Last question, slightly more personal. But do your kids think it's cool what you do? Do they get?
It's funny. Yeah. So I got a 10-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl who, well, almost 10. And sometimes they care and sometimes they don't. The last show I was on, I've never seen them more into what I do. Like they wanted to watch animatics.
Oh, wow.
Like they were but it was like a CG show. So, when I bring back like primary animation from the overseas studio, my son would be like, "Oh, is this just primary? I'll wait for the secondary." Like it was getting to that. But they were everything I showed them. Every day when I came home from work, they wanted to see something. They were quoting it. My daughter actually got to be My son did like a one-off voice on Home, and then my daughter actually was.
Cool.
I brought her in to do some scratch, just for this. Like, she was at the time she was very young. Like, I want to say 3 or 4 when she recorded the voices, and I brought her in to do some scratch, and she was great. So she ended up getting this like minor recurring role on the show, and
Oh, that's
that
awesome.
was fun.
That's
Um,
so cool.
but yeah, I mean, I think they think it's fun that I'm in animation. But as I said, my oldest is 10, so give it a couple of years, and then
Yeah.
Dorky Dad, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, right now it seems cool, but you know,
Oh, Todd, thanks for all your insights and stuff. I think you've always been too generous with your time with me. I've always appreciated
oh well, thank
stuff
you
like
for
this.
saying that. I mean, like, I've been seeing your stuff come along. It's exciting to kind of watch what you're doing from afar.